The command center was filled with tension. Alarms blared as the Draconeer fleet positioned itself above the planet, preparing for an all-out assault. The Elith nobles whispered nervously, but Elias stood firm, his mind racing. "You want to strike first?" Shiara asked, stepping closer. "How?" "Their fleet is stronger." Elias smirked. "Strength means nothing if you know where to hit." The High Speaker narrowed his glowing eyes. "Explain." Elias turned to the holographic display of the enemy fleet. "The Draconeer love overwhelming force, but they're predictable. They'll focus all their fire on your capital city, trying to scare you into surrender." Sayara frowned. "That is true." Elias pointed to a smaller ship near the center of the fleet. "That's their command ship. Take it out, and their whole fleet falls into chaos." One of the Elith generals scoffed. "Impossible. Their shields are too strong." Elias grinned. "Not if we get inside first." Ciara's eyes widened. "You want to infiltrate their command ship?" Elias crossed his arms. "It's what I do best." The High Speaker hesitated. "That is madness." Elias smirked. "No, that's human ingenuity." Ciara took a deep breath. "What do you need?" Elias turned to her. "A stealth ship, a small team, and one crazy princess willing to break a few rules." Ciara hesitated, then nodded. "Then let's break them." Minutes later, Elias and Ciara were inside a sleek Elith stealth craft, speeding toward the enemy fleet. "You didn't have to come," Elias said as he prepped his weapons. Ciara gave him a sharp look. "You are bound to me now. I will not let you die alone." Elias chuckled. "Romantic." She sighed. "Just focus on not getting us killed." The stealth ship glided undetected past the enemy defenses, approaching the command vessel. Elias and Ciara suited up, their armor lightweight but strong. The pilot spoke through the comms. "Dropping you in 30 seconds." Elias grinned. "Time to remind these lizards why messing with humans is a bad idea." The hatch opened, and they jumped. Gravity pulled them fast toward the enemy ship. Their suits absorbed the impact as they landed silently on the hull. Ciara activated a device on her wrist, disabling a section of the ship's shields. Elias pulled out his plasma cutter. "Let's knock." He sliced a hole into the hull, and they slipped inside, weapons drawn. The corridors were dimly lit, and the air smelled of metal and reptilian musk. Ciara whispered, "We must reach the command center quickly." Elias smirked. "Lead the way, princess." They moved fast, avoiding patrols. But just as they neared the command room, a deep growl echoed from behind them. Elias turned, his pulse quickening. Draconeer warriors had found them. Elias followed Ciara through the glowing corridors of the royal ship, his mind racing. A council was about to decide his fate, and from what he had learned so far, half of them wanted him dead. "Let me guess," Elias said as they walked. "This council of yours is made up of powerful people who don't like change." Ciara didn't look at him. "They fear change." "There is a difference." "Not to me," Elias muttered. 2 guards flanked them as they approached massive silver doors. The Elith symbols on them shimmered before the doors slid open. Inside was a grand chamber filled with high-ranking Elith, all dressed in regal robes. Their glowing eyes turned toward Elias the moment he stepped in. Whispers filled the room. The outsider, the skyborn, the human. At the center of the chamber sat the High Speaker, an aged Elith with deep silver markings across his face. He raised a hand, and the room fell silent. "Elias Vance," the High Speaker said. His voice was deep, commanding. "You have performed an act that was thought impossible. You have defied destiny itself, and now we must decide what to do with you." Elias clenched his jaw. "I don't see why this is so hard. I saved your princess. You should be thanking me, not putting me on trial." A noble in the crowd scoffed. "This human does not understand the damage he has done." "Damage?" Elias snapped. I stopped the Draknir from using your princess as a political hostage. How is that damage? Sayara stepped forward. Honored elders, I have spoken with Elias Vance. He does not believe in our prophecy. He acted out of duty, not destiny. Another council member hissed, but the prophecy is real. His arrival signals great change, and change always brings war. Elias sighed. So that's what this is about. You're afraid of what happens next. The High Speaker studied him. You are a human, Captain Vance. Your kind is unpredictable. In all our history, the Eleth have followed the path of fate. But you do not follow anything but your own will. Elias smirked. Yeah, that's called free choice. You should try it sometime. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Sayara shot him a warning look, but Elias didn't care. I don't care about your prophecy, he continued. I don't care about fate. But I do care about one thing. Survival. He looked around. You think killing me will save you? No, it won't. The Draknir will come for you again. And next time, I won't be here to save you. Silence filled the room. For the first time, some of the Eleth looked uncertain. The High Speaker narrowed his eyes. Then what do you propose, human? Elias crossed his arms. Simple. You don't kill me. You work with me. Sayara inhaled sharply. The council members whispered among themselves. And then the High Speaker spoke. Very well, he said. Then let us discuss. What must come next? Toby continued. The ceremonial hall exploded into noise. Nobles shouted in panic. Guards tightened their grips on their weapons, and a High Speaker raised his hands for silence. Elias, however, was completely calm. The Draknir were here for him. Sayara turned to the guard. How many ships? The guard's expression was grim. At least 20 war-class vessels. Their fleet is armed and ready to fire. Elias let out a low whistle. That's a hell of a welcoming party. The High Speaker's face darkened. They believe you are too dangerous to live. Elias rolled his shoulders. That makes 2 of us. Sayara gave him a sharp look. This is not a joke, Captain Vance. If we refuse, they will burn our homeworld. The High Speaker stood. We must answer. Bring them to the grand viewing chamber. Elias and Sayara exchanged a glance before following. They were led into a massive command center, where a large holographic screen displayed the enemy fleet hovering above the planet. A moment later, a Draknir warlord appeared on the screen. His reptilian face twisted into a sneer, his golden eyes filled with hatred. Eleth cowards, the warlord growled. You protect the human. The High Speaker stood firm. The Elias Vance is under royal protection. The Draknir bared his sharp teeth. Then you invite destruction. Elias stepped forward. Hey, Lizard Breath, let's cut the threads. What do you really want? The warlord hissed. You, human. You humiliated the Draknir when you stole the princess from our fortress. That insult must be repaid in blood. Elias smirked. So let me guess, you're too scared to face me alone. So you brought an entire fleet. The warlord snarled, but Sayara cut in. We will not surrender him. The warlord's expression darkened. Then we take him by force. The transmission cut off. Alarms blared through the chamber. The enemy ships were charging their weapons. Elias exhaled. Looks like we're doing this the hard way. Sayara turned to her generals. Prepare the planetary defenses. Elias grabbed her arm. That won't be enough. Sayara frowned. Then what do you suggest? Elias grinned. You said it yourself. Humans don't follow fate. So let's make our own plan. Sayara studied him for a moment, then nodded. Then we fight. The High Speaker raised an eyebrow. What do you propose, human? Elias turned to the screen, eyes gleaming with determination. We hit them first. Captain Elias Vance moved like a shadow through the ruined corridors of the alien stronghold. His pulse rifle hummed softly in his grip, ready to fire. The mission was supposed to be impossible. A lone human breaking into the fortress of the Drakenir, a brutal warrior race feared across the galaxy. But Elias wasn't just any human. He was a soldier of Terra, and humans had a habit of doing the impossible. His objective was clear: rescue Princess Ciara of the Eleth Dominion. She had been captured by the Drakenir weeks ago, and her people were too afraid to mount a rescue. The Eleth were a highly advanced species, known for their telepathic abilities and delicate, almost ethereal forms. They relied on diplomacy and subtle influence, not brute force. But humans were different. Elias had studied the enemy's patterns, their weaknesses. He moved fast, taking down guards with brutal efficiency, silent, deadly, unstoppable. His armor was battered, his body covered in minor wounds, but he pressed forward. Failure was not an option. At last, he reached the heavily guarded chamber where the princess was held. Two massive Drakenir warriors stood at the entrance, their reptilian eyes scanning for threats. Elias didn't hesitate. He hurled a flash grenade, blinding them, then surged forward. A brutal exchange followed: gunfire, steel, and blood. The Drakenir were powerful, but Elias was faster, smarter. Within seconds, both guards lay dead at his feet. He kicked open the door. Inside, the princess sat on a floating energy platform, restrained by glowing chains. She was tall and regal, her violet-hued skin glowing faintly under the dim light. Silver tattoos ran across her arms, symbols of royal blood. Her large, luminescent eyes locked onto Elias with a mix of shock and curiosity. "You're human," she whispered. "No time for introductions, princess," Elias said, cutting her restraints with his plasma knife. "We need to move." She hesitated. "How did you?" "Later," he growled, pulling her to her feet. "They'll be on us any second." Right on cue, alarms blared. The fortress rumbled as enemy reinforcements closed in. Elias grabbed Ciara's hand and sprinted. The princess, though graceful, struggled to keep up. Unlike humans, the Eleth weren't built for running. Blaster shots rained down on them. Elias shielded Ciara, returning fire with brutal precision. Explosions rocked the corridors. He could see the extraction point ahead, his ship waiting in the distance. "Almost there," he shouted. Then, just as they reached the open sky, a blinding pulse of energy hit him from behind. Pain flared through his body. His vision blurred. His limbs refused to move. Elias collapsed, barely registering the figures that surrounded him. Not Drakenir, Eleth warriors. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Princess Ciara standing over him, her expression unreadable. "Forgive me, Captain," she said softly, "but you cannot leave." Elias stood in the middle of the grand chamber, surrounded by the most powerful Eleth in existence. He had just told them to work with him instead of fearing him. Now he waited for their answer. The High Speaker studied him carefully. "You believe you can guide us through this crisis, human." Elias folded his arms. "I believe you don't have a choice." Murmurs spread through the council. Some looked furious, others thoughtful. Ciara remained silent, watching everything. One noble, his silver tattoos pulsing with anger, stepped forward. "We cannot allow this human to walk freely. The prophecy doesn't matter." Ciara interrupted, her voice sharp. "We cannot ignore reality. The Drakenir will strike again. And when they do, will you still be arguing about fate?" The noble flinched but did not argue. The High Speaker tapped his fingers together. "If we do allow him to stay, how do we ensure he does not become a threat?" Ciara hesitated. Then, before anyone could stop her, she spoke words that shocked the entire room. "I will bind him to me." Silence fell. Elias frowned. What?" The High Speaker leaned forward. "You are suggesting a royal bond." Elias glanced between them. "Somebody want to explain what that means?" Ciara exhaled. A royal bond is an ancient agreement. If I claim you as my consort, you will be tied to me politically and culturally. It will prove to our people that you are not an enemy." Elias blinked. Did she just say consort? Another noble gasped. "Princess, you would bind yourself to a human." Sayara turned to them. "If it prevents war and stabilizes our empire, then yes." Elias chuckled dryly. "Hold on. You want me to pretend to be your husband? It would not need to be real," Sayara said quickly, though something in her eyes betrayed hesitation. "It is symbolic, a political maneuver." The council erupted into heated discussion. Some approved of the idea. Others were furious. Elias sighed. He had come to rescue a princess, not get himself engaged to one. But then again, "If I agree to this," he said, "what happens to me after?" Sayara hesitated. "You would remain under Elith protection. No one would dare harm you." Elias rubbed his chin. "And if I refuse?" The High Speaker answered coldly. "Then we will have no choice but to exile you, or worse." Elias sighed. So it was either marry the alien princess or probably die. He glanced at Sayara. She was calm, but her hands were clenched at her sides. This wasn't easy for her either. "Fine," he said finally. "I'll do it." Gasps filled the chamber. Sayara closed her eyes briefly, then nodded. "It is decided," the High Speaker said. "The princess and the human shall be bound." Elias groaned. What the hell had he just signed up for? Elias sat in a grand chamber, staring at the shimmering fabric draped over his shoulders. It was a ceremonial robe, light and flowing, with strange silver patterns glowing faintly against the dark material. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. Sayara, standing nearby, glanced at him. She was dressed in an elegant royal gown, her silver tattoos glowing brighter than usual. "You agreed to this, Captain Vance." Elias sighed. "Yeah, well, I didn't expect a full royal ceremony. Thought we'd just sign some papers, shake hands, and be done with it." Sayara raised an eyebrow. "This is not a human contract. The Elith take bonds seriously." Before Elias could argue, the grand doors opened, and 2 guards gestured for them to follow. The ceremonial hall was massive, filled with Elith nobles, all watching silently. A giant symbol glowed above them, shifting in the air like living light. At the center of the room stood the High Speaker, his eyes glowing with power. He raised his hands, and the room fell into deep silence. "The fate of our people has been altered," he announced. "The human outsider has defied destiny, and now he stands before us, not as a threat, but as one of us." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Elias wasn't sure if they sounded happy about that. Sayara stepped forward. "I, Princess Sayara of the Elith Dominion, claim this bond by my own will." Elias sighed. He had no idea how this ritual worked, but he figured he should play along. "And I, Elias Vance of Terra, accept this bond." A strange energy filled the air. The glowing symbol above them flared brightly, pulsing in rhythm with Sayara's markings. Elias felt a strange warmth pass through his body, like something unseen had wrapped around him. Sayara's eyes widened slightly. Elias frowned. "What the hell was that?" he asked. The High Speaker's gaze was unreadable. "The bond is real now. You are connected to the princess in ways beyond mere words." Elias didn't like the sound of that. "Wait, real? You said this was just symbolic." Sayara looked at her hands. Her glowing tattoos now had a faint golden hue mixed with their silver. She seemed just as surprised as Elias. "This was not expected," she whispered. The High Speaker nodded solemnly. Perhaps the prophecy was right after all. The human does not merely change fate. Fate changes for him. Elias groaned. "Yeah, well, fate better start explaining things, because I don't like surprises." Before anyone could say more, a guard rushed into the chamber, panic in his voice. "High Speaker, the Draknir fleet has arrived. They demand the human, or they will attack." The room erupted into chaos. Sayara turned to Elias, her eyes sharp. "It seems your presence has drawn more than just prophecy," she said. Elias smirked. "Guess it's time to show them what humans do best." Elias woke up with a sharp pain in his back. His vision was blurry, his body heavy. For a moment, he thought he was still in the Draknir fortress. But as his senses returned, he realized the truth. He was a prisoner. The room around him was large and elegant, with smooth metallic walls that pulsed with soft blue light. Strange symbols floated in the air, shifting like mist. It wasn't a cell, but it was definitely locked. The only door had no handle or controls. Elias groaned and sat up. His armor was gone. His weapons gone. Even his wrist communicator had been taken. "Great," he muttered. "Rescue the princess. Get captured in return." "Classic." A voice echoed from the walls. "You are awake, human." Elias turned sharply. A holographic figure appeared before him. A tall Elith male, dressed in ceremonial robes. His silver eyes glowed with an unnatural light. "Where am I?" Elias demanded. "You are aboard the royal flagship, Valshera," the figure said. "You are under royal custody." Elias clenched his fists. "Custody? I saved your princess from the Draknir, and this is my reward." The hologram didn't react. "Your actions have caused complications. The princess will speak with you soon. Until then, remain here." The image flickered and disappeared. Elias stood up and paced. Something was very wrong. He had expected gratitude, maybe a diplomatic thank you. But instead, he had been taken prisoner by the very people he saved. Why? His thoughts were interrupted when the door finally opened. Two Elith guards stepped inside, their faces emotionless. Between them, Princess Sayara walked in. She was no longer wearing the simple prisoner's robe from before. Now she was dressed in a flowing royal gown, her silver tattoos glowing slightly. She looked powerful, untouchable. "Elias Vance," she said, her voice calm but unreadable. "Princess," he said, folding his arms, "you gonna explain why I'm locked up?" Sayara studied him for a moment. "Do you know what you have done?" "Yeah," he said. "I risked my life to save yours. You're welcome, by the way." She exhaled slowly. "You don't understand. No one was supposed to be able to rescue me. It was impossible." Elias frowned. "Well, guess what? Humans do impossible things all the time." Sayara hesitated, then spoke in a lower tone. "There is a prophecy among my people, one that speaks of an outsider who defies fate, an outsider who will either save or destroy our civilization. When you broke into the Draknir stronghold, when you succeeded where no Elith ever could, you proved that you might be the one." Elias stared at her. "You're saying I'm part of some ancient prophecy?" Sayara met his gaze. "Yes, and that is why I cannot let you go." Elias stood at the entrance of the command center, his blaster aimed at the Draknir warlord. The massive reptilian warrior sat on a throne-like command chair, his golden eyes glowing with amusement. Around him, several elite guards gripped their weapons, ready to strike. "You came all this way just to die, human," the warlord growled. Elias smirked. "Yeah. Funny. I was about to say the same to you." Without warning, he fired. The shot sizzled through the air, but the warlord moved fast. He dodged, rolling from his chair as his guards attacked. Sierra leaped forward, spinning her energy staff with deadly precision. She struck one guard in the chest, sending him crashing into a console. Another lunged at her, but Elias took him down with a well-placed shot to the leg. The warlord roared, grabbing a massive plasma sword from his belt. He charged at Elias with terrifying speed. Elias barely had time to dodge. The blade sliced through the air, scorching the metal floor where he had stood a second ago. "Fast," Elias muttered, but not fast enough. He ducked, rolling between the warlord's legs and firing upward. The blast hit the warlord's shoulder, making him snarl in pain. Ciara moved beside Elias. "We need to disable the ship." Elias nodded, spotting a glowing control panel behind the warlord. "Cover me." Ciara blocked another guard's attack, while Elias sprinted toward the controls. The warlord roared in fury, swinging his plasma sword wildly. Sparks flew as Elias barely avoided getting sliced in half. He reached the console and pulled out a hacking device. "Come on, come on." A warning alarm blared. Self-destruct sequence activated. Elias's eyes widened. "That wasn't me." The warlord laughed. "If I die, I take you all with me." Ciara's face hardened. "Then we take the ship down before it destroys the planet." Elias gritted his teeth. He overloaded the system, causing the ship's power to flicker. The shields collapsed. Outside, the Elith fleet opened fire. Explosions rocked the ship as enemy fighters were torn apart. The warlord lunged one last time, roaring with fury. Elias didn't hesitate. He grabbed a fallen plasma blade and swung with all his strength. The warlord's eyes widened in shock as the blade pierced his chest. He staggered back, gasping. "Impossible." Elias pulled the blade free. "You should have stayed in your throne." The warlord collapsed. Ciara grabbed Elias's arm. "We need to go." They sprinted toward the escape hatch, barely making it before the ship exploded in a brilliant fireball. Elith ships cheered over the comms. The battle was won. Later, in the royal palace, the high speaker looked at Elias. "You have changed our fate, human. What will you do now?" Elias smirked, glancing at Ciara. "Guess I'm sticking around." Elias spun around, his blaster raised. 3 Draknir warriors blocked the hallway, their golden eyes glowing in the dim light. They were massive, covered in dark, scaled armor, and each carried a plasma blade crackling with energy. One of them hissed, "The human thinks he can sneak into our ship." Elias smirked. "Well, I was hoping to, but you guys ruined it." Before they could react, he fired. A bolt of blue plasma slammed into the nearest Draknir's chest, sending him crashing into the wall. Ciara moved like lightning. She spun her Elith energy staff, blocking an incoming blade before driving the other end into an enemy's stomach. The warrior roared in pain but didn't fall. Elias dodged as a plasma blade sliced the air near his head. He rolled, came up fast, and shot the warrior in the knee. The Draknir howled, collapsing. The last warrior lunged at Ciara, swinging his blade in a deadly arc. She ducked, but he was fast, too fast. Elias reacted without thinking. He grabbed a fallen blade and blocked the attack. Sparks flew as energy clashed against energy. His arms burned from the force, but he held on. "Not bad for a human," the warrior growled. Elias gritted his teeth. "Not bad for a lizard." He twisted the blade, forcing the Draknir off balance. Ciara took the opening, slamming her staff into the warrior's neck. He dropped instantly. Silence filled the hallway. Elias exhaled, shaking his arms. "Remind me never to sword fight a Draknir again." Ciara smirked. "You held your own." Elias wiped sweat from his forehead. "Yeah, well, let's get to that command center before more of them show up." They moved quickly, stepping over the fallen warriors. Ciara accessed a nearby console, her fingers flying over the glowing symbols. "The command center is 2 levels up," she said. "I can override the security doors, but only for a few minutes." Elias nodded. "Then we move fast." The doors slid open, revealing a vertical shaft leading to the upper levels. Ciara activated her grav boots, hovering off the ground. Elias grinned. "You aliens and your fancy tech." She held out her hand. "Try not to slow me down, human." He grabbed her hand, and together they launched upward, moving through the shaft like ghosts. At the top, they landed silently. The command room was just beyond a reinforced door. Ciara placed a hand on the panel. "Once we enter, there's no turning back." Elias checked his weapon. Then let's end this. She nodded. The doors hissed open. Inside, the Draknir warlord turned in surprise. His eyes narrowed, and a cruel smile formed on his lips. "You should not have come, human," he growled. Elias smirked. "Yeah, well, I'm not leaving either." Elias stared at Sayara, trying to make sense of her words. A prophecy. Him. It sounded ridiculous. "You're joking," he said, crossing his arms. Sayara shook her head. "I am not." Elias sighed. "Look, Princess, I didn't break into that fortress because of some prophecy. I did it because your people were too afraid to do it themselves. Humanity doesn't sit around waiting for fate. We make our own fate." Sayara's expression remained unreadable, but something flickered in her eyes. "You don't understand the weight of what you've done," she said. "The Aleph believe in destiny. Our entire civilization is built on the idea that fate cannot be changed. And yet, you changed it." Elias frowned. "So what? You think I'm some kind of chosen one?" Sayara hesitated. "The prophecy speaks of a skyborn outsider who will arrive when the Aleph stand at the edge of destruction. This outsider will do the impossible and force the Aleph to change, or perish." Elias exhaled. "And because I rescued you, that means I'm this outsider." "Many believe so," Chiara admitted, "and that terrifies them." Elias studied her face. She wasn't lying. She was afraid too. "So what happens now?" he asked. "You keep me locked up forever?" Sayara looked away. "I don't know." Elias stepped closer. "You're the princess. You have the power to let me go." She shook her head. "It is not that simple. Some of my people want to worship you. Others want you dead before the prophecy can come true." Elias smirked. "Well, that's just fantastic. Either I'm a god or a threat." Sayara didn't smile. "If the wrong faction wins, they will kill you, Captain Vance." Elias ran a hand through his hair. This was insane. He had expected political trouble, maybe some distrust from the Aleph, but not this. "And what about you?" he asked. "What do you believe?" Sayara hesitated for a long moment before answering. "I believe that you are dangerous, but not because of a prophecy." "Then why?" Elias pressed. She met his gaze. "Because you are human. And humans change everything they touch." For the first time, Elias saw the real fear in her eyes. Not fear of him personally, but fear of what he represented. Humans were unpredictable, unstoppable. The Aleph had spent centuries believing the universe followed a fixed path. And now, Elias had proven them wrong. A sudden alarm blared, breaking the moment. Sayara's head snapped toward the door. "What now?" Elias muttered. A guard rushed in. "Your Highness, the council is meeting early. They are deciding the human's fate. Now." Sayara's expression turned cold. "Then we must hurry." She turned to Elias. "If you want to live, you will come with me."